So let's talk about Japan's new, I would say, insane copyright laws. I think that's the best word that really anyone can use to describe them. So three big things were part of this new copyright law that has huge implications, and not just console gaming, but PC gaming. Remember, Japan is the third largest video game market. So anything that Japan passes can have some pretty major implications for the entire video game market globally. Because, like I said, if Japan is the third largest video game market and they're really starting to crack down on these things, it's going to have a big effect on the gaming industry as a whole. So, one big point that PC gamers would probably be most interested in is the resale of stolen keys. Now, G2A is a best example of websites. It's the most prominent one, at least. There are plenty of them out there that sell you cheap keys. Oh, get these cheap games, and a lot of the keys, while some of them may be legitimate, a lot of them are also stolen keys. Remember the Sniper Elite situation with G2A? How the publisher cracked down on that, and pretty much people who bought those keys from G2A, who bought Sniper Elite, their games were pretty much taken away from them because they were not obtained legitimately. I know it sucks to the people who bought the keys, because they didn't know that the keys were stolen in most cases. But at the end of the day, the publisher of the game did not make any money off of it at all, and it's pretty much a form of piracy. I mean, stolen keys. It's pretty much piracy, I would say. So I don't necessarily have a problem with Japan cracking down on that because, well, it actually protects the consumers, because if they purchase a stolen key, a lot of the times when they purchase stolen keys, it's unknowingly, because they have no idea in a lot of cases that the key was stolen. They just, go on a website that says, oh, this cheap game, get it, 50% off on our website, so people buy it. And it actually ends up being stolen, and in a lot of cases, publishers will crack down on those stolen keys and pretty much make those keys null and void, and your copy of the game pretty much worth nothing at that point. So you'd be pouring money into these keys, and you end up getting the game taken away from you because you didn't obtain it legitimately. Even if you didn't know about it, it's still, them protecting their copyright and all that. So I think this is actually a good thing that Japan did, because stolen keys, any way you slice it, it hurts the developers, it hurts the publishers, and it also hurts the consumers when the publishers legitimately, because it's within their legal right to crack down on these codes if they were not legally obtained. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that. What really becomes, I wouldn't say Orwellian is the good word for it, but just downright insane is really the best word I could use to describe these two provisions of the law. Mainly affects console gamers because it specifically targets consoles. So one big thing is you cannot modify your console in any way. You cannot modify how the console functions or anything like that. So think of George Hotz. Do you guys remember George Hotz? He was the guy who, back in 2007, he was very famous for being the first person in the world to be able to jailbreak the iPhone, because back then the iPhone was locked to AT&T, and that was the only network you could legitimately run the iPhone on. So this guy, he was a 17-year-old kid at that time, and he was able to jailbreak the iPhone. He was the first person to be able to jailbreak the iPhone and allow it to be compatible with the T-Mobile network. So that's what his initial claim to fame was. But then a few years later, he was famous for being the person who was able to jailbreak the PlayStation 3 for it to be able to run Linux. Now, if this part sounds familiar to you, it's because this was the catalyst for the hacker group Anonymous hacking into the PlayStation network, and pretty much that was a whole mess. If anyone remembers, if anyone was a PlayStation gamer back then, or even if you weren't and just kept hearing the stories every day coming out about this huge data breach. It's one of the biggest data breaches in the history of technology. So it was just a huge disaster. It cost Sony at least $100 million, probably more. And it was just it was just a huge disaster for Sony. The network being down for over 3 weeks and personal information, credit card information being compromised. It was just really bad. And the reasoning behind the anonymous hacker group doing this is to punish Sony for punishing George Hotz, because there was a legal dispute between George Hotz and Sony, even though it was eventually settled out of court and nothing really happened to George Hotz. He wasn't sent to prison. He wasn't fined. Sony just said, look, as long as you agree not to modify any of our hardware anymore, we're not going to go after you. This is pretty much a done thing. Now, George was very smart in agreeing to this out-of-court settlement, because if he was taken to court, he would have most likely lost the case, because, I mean, it's in Sony's terms of the service. It's pretty much in everything that you're not allowed to modify consoles. Now, the thing that really pissed Anonymous off wasn't necessarily that this kid was hacking consoles and Sony cracked down on him hacking their console. It was much more complex than that, because remember, back in 2006, 2007, that was one of Sony's advertised features for the PlayStation 3. They were advertising the PS3's ability to run Linux. So when they just decide, oh yeah, no, you're not allowed to run the PlayStation on Linux anymore, I assume this was an anti-piracy thing, because Linux is not regulated by Sony. So it's much easier to pirate games through Linux. I'm pretty sure that was the main reason why Sony did that, because otherwise they wouldn't be bothered with this PR thing. Although really the mainstream didn't care, because the mainstream doesn't really use Linux, right? Linux is more of a niche OS for people who are really tech savvy. But I guess it kind of makes sense in the long run, because Anonymous, obviously, they know a lot about tech. So when Sony decides, hey, we're going to do this to you, and, you know, even though you're just bringing back a feature that we originally offered, yeah, they're going to be pissed off. So that was a whole mess. I honestly think that was probably, if that never happened, Japan probably wouldn't have passed this law about it just being flat out illegal, no questions asked, you get up to 5 years in prison, so it just prevents this kind of situation from happening again. Because again, this was this catalyst for the PlayStation Network being taken down and being hacked. And remember, Sony is a company based out of Japan, so maybe they lobbied this law to be put forward. I'm not sure. I don't know a lot about Japan and about the political system of Japan, how much political influence technology companies like Sony and Nintendo have. Adam Koralik is a guy who's always traveling to Japan and probably knows a lot more about Japanese law and how things are done in Japan more than someone like me would. So I guess asking him would probably be better. He probably has more knowledge and expertise about how things are done in Japan. But I would speculate that situation with Sony Anonymous and it all starting with some kid modifying his PlayStation 3 console. I honestly think if that would have never happened, if the whole Sony 2011 PSN hack never happened, that this law probably wouldn't have happened. I know it's like it was 7 years ago, so you would think that if that was the case, this law would have been passed more recently. But again, it's just pure speculation on my part. I don't know. Like I said, my disclaimer is I don't know too much about Japan and how they run things over there. So that's just speculation on my part. Even though I have no evidence, I still feel in my gut that whole situation with the PlayStation Network back in 2011 at least had some influence on this law being passed. But I think 5 years is a pretty harsh sentence, even if you're just modding your console, because again, modding your console isn't just about piracy. I know a lot of people like to mod their consoles for downloading emulators, and of course they're downloading ROMs that are illegitimate. And obviously the two big players in the console market in Japan, or really the only two players because Microsoft is pretty much a non-factor, are Sony and Nintendo. And Sony and Nintendo consoles are probably the most modded consoles that are used compared to the Xbox. I mean, especially Nintendo. How many videos have I seen? Countless videos have been popping up on my recommended feed. There's just countless videos up on YouTube of people modifying their Wii, running better emulators on their Wii than the Virtual Console actually. So actually making improvements to the console and the overall interface and all that, and just adding features on that aren't necessarily hurting the company, but are just a way just for personal use pretty much. That's the problem with this law, is that while yes, sure, there are a lot of cases where people are modifying their consoles just to pirate the games, but I mean, to be fair, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, they have pretty advanced anti-piracy technology into their consoles, because these consoles are always used to connect to the internet on a regular basis. There really aren't too many people that aren't connected online, so you'll have a lot of people consistently logging into the network, and the network has these anti-piracy mechanisms that are able to detect if a game is legitimately obtained or not, and if they find that your copy of the game was illegally obtained, they'll just flat out ban your account, and that's that pretty much. So I don't think that this is really as widespread an issue as Japan is making it out to be. Although I understand the need to protect the intellectual property of these companies. I know a lot of people just hate every single copyright law that exists. I'm not that type of person. Rather, my concern is that it's too vague. Someone could just be modifying their console in any way, and it's just too much of a gray area, or it's not explicitly explained enough about what modifying really means. That seems to be a really big problem with this law, is that it's too vague. There are too many gray areas involved, and it's not explicit enough to let people know, hey, this specifically is illegal. Instead, it's just under this broad umbrella of modding. Like, modding your console can mean anything, really. I mean, modifying your console in any little way, even if it doesn't really hurt the intellectual property of a corporation, it's still illegal, and you could serve 5 years in prison. Now, I'm sure Japan, if you're just modifying little things about your console, they're probably not going to throw you in the slammer for 5 years. But who knows? That's the thing. With these laws, they can do that. You know what I mean? So if I was living in Japan, I'd probably be very concerned right now about this law. Now, me personally, I'm not much into the console modding scene, but I know if that law was passed in the U.S., a lot of people I know would be breaking the law and spend up to 5 years in prison, because I know a lot of people who mod their consoles, and a lot of YouTubers also do it. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of this law. It doesn't apply to me directly, but shit, man, like that, these kind of laws, that's the problem. Like, with these industries, they're global industries, and maybe if one market does it, it might inspire other markets to do the same. So, I don't know. But all I know is that G2A is probably not going to be operating in Japan for too much longer, because they sell a lot of stolen keys. And I doubt they're going to fix their whole system just for Japan. So I think G2A has seen its final days in Japan probably, but I could be wrong. So, and then there's the other thing that's even more crazy, is having a modded save game is also, you can serve up to 5 years in prison for. Now that is just straight up insane. You know how many times I've modded a save game? A lot. I don't understand how modding a save game hurts the game creators, hurts the publishers in any way. I really don't understand this. If you're modding a save game, you're just changing the game in ways that just make the experience better for you. You bought the game legitimately. You know what I mean? So, like, why is modding? This can really apply to anything. This can apply to mods on games like Skyrim or other games. The thing is, it's so vague that we don't really know if that's what it is, or if it's just simply modifying the game save in a way that is harmful. Although I can't think of too many examples of modded game saves that are harmful. I know game save mods that allow you to cheat in the game and do all those things. But like I said, when it comes to online games where you can potentially avoid microtransactions and all that stuff, I mean, it doesn't really apply to online gaming because it's talking about save games, and that usually means single player games. Because if it's a game as a service, they'll automatically save your data, and if you are modding in any way, they're just going to ban you. I mean, so this isn't hurtful to those who are selling a whole bunch of microtransactions or whatever. It's not really hurtful to anyone. I think this law is definitely the most crazy out of all of them, because at least there's a rationale for the other ones. Okay, stolen keys, I think, I mean, I don't know about, I know a lot of PC gamers probably like stolen keys because they save a lot of money that way, but I think that stolen keys, having a law on that makes sense because it protects the copyright and makes sure that everything is obtained in a legal way. And then with the modified consoles, although I obviously don't agree with that law. I think 5 years is a harsh punishment, even if you are modifying the console in a way that can hurt developers or publishers or whatever. But I think this game save data thing, where you modify your game save, is just crazy. It's just crazy. Think of anything that can modify a game save. I mean, I was doing this when I was like 9 years old. There was a thing called Action Replay, where you pop a little cartridge into the DS and you can modify your game save in so many different ways and add all these different cheats to your game. I remember I would do that back in the day in the Pokemon games because I was just so bad at the game that I would just use cheats and all that. And that's how I'd be able to get Pokemon from like different generations and all that. So I had a good time with Action Replay, but apparently under this law it could potentially be illegal. I could serve up to 5 years in prison. I mean, obviously not me because I don't live in Japan. And then you could also have a fine up to 5 million yen, which is about 46,000 US dollars. So both of those are pretty insane. I mean, that's a pretty hefty fine, and the prison punishment is just crazy. It's just insane. Hey, if anyone lives in Japan and has a better understanding of the law and has followed the law on more consistently than I have, because I didn't, most people in the West didn't even know about this until it was actually passed. So, if you live in Japan and have some more insight, you can let me know in the comments down below. So you can let me know and let the viewers know about what exactly this law entails. If I got something wrong, if it actually protects people who aren't really harming publishers or developers and just, modding for fun. Let me know. But from what it seems, this law is very vague, and it really could hurt more than it can help in a lot of ways, because you're going to have a lot of kids, young people, pretty much having their entire life destroyed, being sent to prison and being fined and all that for just modifying a game console and just doing something that they like to do as a hobby, and they're not necessarily set out to harm anybody, to harm a company, and to take away profits from them. I know a lot of people, a lot of mods do that. But I still think 5 years. I understand it's the type of punishment that's supposed to prevent crime from happening if the punishment is so harsh. I understand that rationale. But I mean, that's the thing. I mean, prohibition, even if you have such a harsh punishment for it, it's in most cases it doesn't work. People are still going to do it, and people are just going to be sent to prison, and it just seems crazy to me that